One, two, three, four.
The Leadership Adventure.
The Leadership Adventure.
For me, leadership starts with the mind. One of the most important things that I think that a leader can do to develop a compassionate leadership is also develop their mental attitude towards leadership. You need to have empathy, but you have to lead with compassion.
The Leadership Adventure.
Welcome to The Leadership Adventure, the podcast that takes you through the highs and lows of being a leader in the 21st century. In this series, we talk to experienced leaders about their journey to success, inspiring you to make a difference and face the challenges ahead. I'm Olga Dudko, and I will be your host today.
In this episode, we will talk about compassionate leadership and its place in the post-pandemic world. I'm joined today by Ricardo Martins, the CEO of Cegoc Portugal, part of the Cegos Group, international L&D company that trains more than 250,000 professionals in 50 countries every year. Ricardo has been leading Cegoc Portugal for over 20 years now. He has extensive experience in leadership, personal development, sales, and negotiation. Hi, Ricardo, and welcome to this podcast. How are you today?
Very well, Olga. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to debate this very interesting topic, I would say, very important topic in today's world.
Yeah, indeed, it's very important, and I'm so happy to sit down with you today and talk about it. And thanks a lot for finding the time. I know how busy you are, so thanks a lot. So, my first question, or maybe question zero. I remember when I first approached you and I invited you to take part in this project, you said yes straight away. And then we discussed different topics that we could develop on this podcast. And I remember this particular topic, compassionate leadership, you came up with this topic quite quickly. And I felt like you really wanted to talk about it and develop it. So let's start with the why. Why this topic? Why is it so important?
Well, first of all, I feel very strongly about it because I believe that in the world that is changing so much, where we as leaders are challenged to face so much change around us, with so much ambiguity in the reality that we face ahead, we do need to have some kind of reference to where and in what way will we shape the world and the people around us to build a better work environment, a better planet ultimately. And I think that strong leadership is about more than just a particular set of skills that we acquire, either through training or through the life that we have. It also requires leaders with a set of traits, I would say, that will show consideration, let's say, towards others. The one trait that is crucial, in my opinion, to be a strong and positive leader today is compassion. So I'm very passionate about compassion, let's say.
Great. And if you try to give a definition, because there are so many talks about compassion and empathy and well-being and all these important topics, can we just stop for a second and try to give your definition? What does it mean, compassionate leadership? And from your point of view, are there any difference between compassion and empathy, for example?
Oh, for sure. I think we can explore that. I mean, today, as a leader, as many moments in the past, I would say leaders are called upon to make decisions. This is one of the things that we're paid for, and some of these decisions are not necessarily the easiest ones. So for me, compassionate leadership has to do with the fundamental question of how to ultimately do hard things, but do it in a way that could be considered more humane, more I would say, understandable by the people that are led by us. For me, compassion is much more than an emotion. Many people actually see the process of leadership and compassionate leadership as an either-or kind of a challenge or decision. You are either everybody's friend, or you are the monster or the bastard in the room, let's say, okay? And I always felt that compassion, more than an emotion, is actually action. It's actually what you do instead of what you feel, okay? Through my personal experience as a leader of many teams, and actually as a leadership coach of many leaders, I've come to the conclusion that compassion has at least three elements that support action. It is ultimately vital that you feel the difficulties we are seeing in others as critical for them and critical for the team or the organization we're talking. Okay, whatever difficulties people are having, even if for me they do not seem particularly important, for those people, for those around us, for their team, for their organization, it is completely critical. Okay, those difficulties should also be a set of circumstances and not self-imposed difficulties for me. Okay? There's a good reason for these difficulties to be felt, and as leaders we should also be able to imagine ourselves in the same difficult situation. This comes to your question about empathy. If we look at compassion and compassion from the perspective of leadership as basically something that is in the middle of the capacity that one has to understand the other person's experience, and on the other hand, our willingness to act upon that feeling. I think we can actually understand where compassion and where empathy and actually other dimensions fit in. I mean, you can sometimes find people that would confuse compassion with pity, for instance. Pity being from a place where I feel very sorry for your situation. I actually understand. I feel that I can, relate to you, but I'm not really going to do nothing about it. I feel sorry for you, but that's it. Empathy, I think, is more closer to I feel with you. I understand, and I actually would do something if I could. In between this, you might have something like sympathy. I feel for you. Wow. So I feel sorry for you, and I feel with you. I can feel some kind of sympathy for your cause or for your plead or for whatever issue you have. Compassion for me ultimately challenges us to go a step forward. It's more like, okay, do you have the empathy and the willingness to help and the willingness to act upon it? Okay, I am here to help is more my mindset and my mental model when I look at compassionate leadership. So if I was to kind of look at the behavioral scope of compassionate leadership, for sure, it is it is about attending to the people that we are leading. It's about understanding the challenges that they face. It's for sure empathizing with them, but ultimately it is wanting to help them and actually acting upon that.
Yeah, so there is, when it comes to compassion and compassionate leadership, from what you have just said, there is always this element of action. It's not just, I feel you, I understand you're suffering, but I'm not going to do anything. When we talk about compassionate leadership, there is always this element of, action.
It is a little bit about alleviation of the suffering. It's more the intention, okay?
Intention,
but it's also important that we understand that sometimes empathy and sometimes compassion, they have their dark sides. I mean, if you as a leader are so empathetic and ultimately, feel and empathize with every and all the employees you have around you, it sometimes becomes quite hard to take decisions.
Any action, of course,
It can be, you can have what we call, or we can call, some authors actually call empathetic hijack. You're so involved at a level of the emotion that ultimately your action is crippled. I think that in fact you must in many ways connect with empathy, but you must lead with compassion. You must ultimately take that level of even courage, I would say, to the next level. I say you take that feeling to the next level. So you need to have empathy, but you have to lead with compassion in the reality, in the world that we have around us today, more than ever, I would say.
There are two things you mentioned, and I want to, stop for a second and unpack those two things. The first one about, this contradiction, either or. I remember when I was preparing for this podcast, I came across the phrase that Eleanor Roosevelt once said, that to handle yourself, use your head, to handle others, use your heart. And reading about compassion and thinking about this phrase, I was thinking to myself, there is a kind of a contradiction here. Because, as a leader, as a manager, as someone who leads other people, sometimes you have to make very tough decisions. Sometimes you need to give negative feedback. Sometimes you need to let someone go. So my question to you, how do you get tough things done in a human way?
It's a very interesting and I would say challenging question, because I don't think there's a straightforward answer to that. I think actually every person has his own experience as being a leader, but also as have been led by leaders, and that might influence a little bit of what our decisions might be in every particular situation. I don't want to walk away from your question, but it's for me, leadership starts with the mind. It is a bunch of choices that you take. It's not a coincidence that things happen. It's a rational process, but it is more and more true to me today. And perhaps I said what I said just before because I tend to look at myself as a more rational person than an emotional person. But I have to admit that confronted with the tough situations, the moments where we do not have the possibility to only look at the issues from a rational point of view, the most effective leaders I've worked with are more leaders that are able to lead from a place of heart and less of a place of mind. Actually, I think that if we want to develop, I would say, compassion leadership or compassionate leaders in our organization, it is important to really pass on to this idea that it's not a either or type of challenge. We can actually be both. We should actually look into be a bit of both. And what can we do to really develop this? Well, start off with perhaps, and going back to the mind, develop a positive attitude. One of the most important things that I think that a leader can do to develop compassionate leadership is also develop their mental attitude towards leadership. If we are able to get people to be positive, supportive, encouraging towards others, it makes people feel more comfortable, I would say, around the challenges they have, around the other people they have. And this leads to, I would say, more open communication about any issues that concern the organization, and actually help people to arrive at the workplace with a completely different attitude. I think that's one of the important things. Another thing is to listen in a way that has, I sometimes as a leader, I for sure fell into this trap many times, is you seem like you're listening, but your head is all over the place. So the need to listen with intent, or listen intently. And you do appreciate leaders that take the time to listen and understand us as employees. To understand the people that we have, around us, they work with us, to talk with them, to learn about what actually makes them tick, what actually is important for this, is incredibly important if you want to create a sense of belonging and promote, a healthy work culture, for instance. This is for sure something that can take people to understand that this is not an either or. This is something you can actually do in both sense. And if you want to create a collaborative culture, you for sure need compassionate leaders. They are the best people at creating and bringing entire teams to collaborate and contribute to the visions and the goals of the organization. If you have one team in an organization that has compassion and is led with compassion, you can actually contagiate in a very positive way the entire organization. So sometimes it just takes one team to get everybody else to want to belong to this kind of tribe, I would say. So then you want to retain the best talent. You're just not going to be effective if you do not have these kinds of behaviors as a whole, and it can't be on occasion. It has to be embedded in the way, in the operation system of the organization as a whole. And it starts up down. It doesn't just install itself if it doesn't have on the top leadership this kind of predisposition, this kind of attitude towards the way leadership is run in the company. Okay, in many ways, it's a way of how you decide. That's where I go back to our leadership starts with the mind. How do you decide to show up? How do you decide to invest your time with your people? It's sometimes it seems like a straightforward decision. But compassionate leaders know the importance of investing time and resources into those that they lead. They will build better relationships with their teams before they are completely focused on the results that these teams achieve. It's a means to an end, I would say, in many ways fundamental if you want to really create this kind of culture.
There is one thing you mentioned previously. Well, you talked a lot about the advantages of compassionate leadership and being compassionate and building these teams. And I was thinking about one thing that you mentioned, that you can be too empathetic sometimes or too sensitive, I don't know, that it will prevent you from maybe any action. I remember when I was, again, preparing for this podcast, I was going through some content, videos, interviews, and there was this term of wise empathy. Something that will not, you're empathetic, but still there are things you need to do. You need take some action. So you will have to take these actions, even though sometimes you feel uncomfortable, So I wanted to ask you one question. We talked a lot about the advantages of being an empathetic leader. From your point of view, are there any disadvantages?
You summon the word wisdom, wise empathy, which invokes that you could be perhaps unwise. And that's part of what I was saying just before, when I think, when you get entangled, you just let emotions drive the car. It's probably just as bad as not having any emotions as well. And in any case, and just going with 100% rationality. So downsides of being over empathetic, I think, have to do with the situation that sometimes occurs, where you start feeling other people's problems, other people's difficulties, as if they are your own, and they basically take over yourself, and it becomes completely crippling, and that's can be, I would say, distressful. It can actually bring in a lot of negative emotions towards a leader that actually needs to have some distance to be able to act. So I think it's also possible that leaders that have gone through the process of what you just said, downsizing or restructuring, having to fire people. I for sure had that experience as being one of my most traumatic experiences as a leader. Like, we started off having to reduce almost to half the headcount we had in the company many years ago, in a very particular situation where the economic crisis was significant, and we had to take very harsh decisions. For me, this was enough to spend not a couple of days, but a couple of months of not being able to even sleep or live with myself under these. I had to fire people that I considered friends. And the idea of overcoming these emotions and alleviating the suffering through action and through, more than intentions, the way we are going to do this can be better if we are able to find some kind of more rational empathy, let's say. How can we, decide the way we do this in a way that will allow people to understand that we are doing this from a place of heart and not a place of pocket, let's say. And so, yes, there is space for burnout. I'm sure that many leaders that are highly empathetic with the teams that they have ultimately will put their own self-being, their own self-care at risk, and ultimately will end up in places that could be considered very detrimental to their mental health. So I would say that compassionate leaders looked after themselves and modeled the self-care to others. Okay, they realize it is quite okay to be human, I would say, to make mistakes, to learn from these mistakes, as it's okay for others to do the same thing. And they give themselves and to others the permission to learn, especially in high-pressure companies or organizations or situations. It is increasingly hard or harder for people to understand that despite all the challenges, they are still human. They can still be authentic people. They can still be, and I think this is a strength. Actually, I think we've in the last, let's say, decade, evolved quite a lot. It is today okay to be empathetic. It's okay to feel. It's okay to have heart as a leader. It is no longer a taboo. This is something that is very, very important. I mean, if I have to also look at what works for me, I would say things like, if you can combine compassion with empathy, and so wise empathy could be this, the way that you are able to use empathy from an emotional point of view, but also from a rational point of view, and not fall into this emotional hijack that I was saying just before. You can actually become more relatable. You as a leader, you're more approachable by the people around you. And this is very useful if you want to collect good information, good data that can help you become more of a leader. I think this is very important to underline.
I like, you just mentioned one thing which made me think that we have evolved a lot as humans, like in the last decade. It's okay to have a heart. It's okay to be compassionate. It's okay to be human and empathetic. And I felt that this kind of evolution, if you like, intensified during the pandemic. I felt like myself included and people around me became a bit more human because of all these crises and these difficult situations that we had to live through. Became more like compassionate and more willing to help those who are next to them, not only in the business, context, but even in personal. Like I got acquainted with some of my neighbors that I never paid attention before because I was so in a hurry and, during the pandemic. So now we are in this new normal world. The pandemic is almost over. But my question to you, from your point of view, in this new world, is there a place for compassionate leadership and for compassion? Are we taking something that we learned during the pandemic to the future, or we are coming back to our old selves?
I think, I do remember the first, I would say, months, maybe weeks of the pandemic, where collectively we were very alert. And just as you, I was reaching out to the neighbors, seeing, is there anything I can do to help? I actually live in a place where I have a lot of elderly citizens and people around me, and I, approach them naturally, and I had never done it. And still today, that prevails, that feeling of connection to other, and it felt good. I also remember that a couple of weeks later, it was starting to change, and we're saying, okay, are people going to be good forever, or are we going to go back to our darkest angels once again? I don't think it's exactly binary. We're not good or bad. I think we have as an entire planet seen significant and structural changes in the way people are behaving, namely in the workplace, and the way that we now accept that working in our homes remotely is not exactly the same thing as working in the office, and that's okay, is a sign of change. It's a sign that we've actually evolved. What I do not want us to think is that compassionate leadership comes because of a pandemic, or should come because of what we had in the past. It actually comes more of what we need to happen and see happen in the future. Is not a soft cushion, scented candle kind of a need. No, actually, I think compassionate leadership requires a great deal more courage and authenticity that we as human beings need, not necessarily in the past and not even necessarily in the future. We need it now. We need it in the present tense, because that makes completely an enormous difference. I mean, look at the idea of diversity and inclusion. This is a big, strong intent in many, many, many countries and many, many places in the world. And I don't see how we can have inclusive leadership if you don't have a compassionate leadership. For me, this doesn't make sense. So if you're not able to ensure that everybody around you is feeling included, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ethnicity, their nationality, their professional capability, if you don't have that, how the hell will you be able to flourish in the future? And so there's more to it than just we're all under threat, therefore we're all going to die, therefore let's be compassionate with each other. Hey, it's not necessarily only when we get to the situation that we need this kind of mental attitude. Actually, I think that compassionate leadership entails a very strong focus on performance and performance management, compassion in a compassionate way. It is also not some easy consensus way forward, I would say. It actually ensures that we are doing what is best in our present settings to enable us to provide high quality services and high quality support for the people we have, not only in the company, but the people we are serving outside of it. So it's more than just the pandemic. It's fundamental if you want to step forward and prevail in a world that is, as I said, more ambiguous, changing at every opportunity, transforming into a more AI-oriented reality, where if we do not stand up as being human or more humane and able to set our leadership traits in this way, then probably we will be better led by some kind of system that is able to fake the process. I mean, I know that, for instance, for coaching, there is already a bunch of bots that do coaching sessions. I kind of feel that is very strange, but some people believe it's the way forward. So there you go. This is my 2 cents of thoughts around what happened after and the pandemic and what's going to be happening forward.
Yeah. So we don't need a wake-up call to be more compassionate and to be more empathetic. That's what you are saying, right?
I'm saying sometimes we do. Sometimes the wake-up call was already there. We just didn't see it. And actually, there's wake-up calls every day of the week. I mean, if you arrive at a place, and we as consultants see that all the time. We are invited to go into teams, we're invited to go into companies, and it's not because everything's perfect, it's because there are problems. And once again, if you show up to a team that is underperforming, that is less than positive about their outcomes, that is actually struggling to survive as a team, very frequently what you look at, what you can see is behind this all is a leader that is suffering himself but nobody's actually compassionate about that. Nobody's seeing that that for him, having to deal within this either-or dilemma is crippling his ability to see beyond the problem. And sometimes I a simple solution could be just get this person to show gratitude, okay, to say thank you to the smaller things, the things that pass under the radar, and get people to see, hey, there's some recognition. I did something today that normally would not be seen, but my leader has come to me and said, well done, you did something great. This is a little bit more than a little less than we need, but just eliminating that idea of it's not less, it's actually enough to show up and say gratitude could be a good way of promoting or the initial states of this. Also getting, how do we get people to feel that they can make a difference? Well, ultimately, this is also part of what a compassionate leader should do. Not only there to do good, it's also to foster an environment where people can be bold and just step up and try to do something that has not been done. And it's okay to perhaps make a mistake. And it's sometimes the smaller steps, taking these very small steps every day and making a difference in people's lives, both at a professional, but also sometimes at a personal level, that allows us to evolve. Not only as an individual, but also as teams, as organizations. And that for sure is something that leaders can give a big contribution.
So about these small steps.
Everybody can exercise compassionate leadership, even if it's not, CEO of the company. Okay. In the work environment, people don't want to just be given orders in today's workplace. This is no longer a modus operandi that we work. They want to feel warmth and care around them. So it takes a little bit more than just one person to give that. If you have a culture that is able to promote this kind of team spirit, and you are fortunate enough to be, and I think that I am in my particular case, a leader of a company like this, then you already have a lot of the hard work done. So it is, of course, important to walk the talk and inspire people through empowering people around you, showing them that you believe in them, building trust for sure. This is big words, it's hard. Yeah. But the small day-to-day decisions that allow people to be more comfortable around you and about you are fundamental. So, I just gave you one before about showing gratitude. It's very interesting how some leaders will say, I don't have time to go around recognizing people. They are doing what they're paid for. Their paycheck is my way of saying thank you, and it's there every end of month. So I said it's very interesting. You don't have time to show gratitude and recognition when people actually do what they're paid for, but you actually find instantly time when somebody fails. So that happens, unfortunately, very frequently when I see people jump out of their chair and go and say, hey, this is not well done. And well, it's also important that you do that, but how many other opportunities did you have to jump up your chair and say, this was well done, this is great, this was fantastic work. By the way, thank you, because this is helping us to, things like this will allow to install this mindset of peace. So from my perspective, you can have all the best intentions of the world, but if you don't walk the talk, then it doesn't take you much further. So if you are able to allow people around you to feel included by your leadership, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of where they're coming, then for sure these people are going to want to contribute to onboarding other people in a different way. I mean, they would not feel well to be received and then not giving back in the same. I think it's a human thing. It's more than that. And of course, there's always some situations where you can have a pep talk, where you can have a one-to-one, but also just modeling that behavior is fundamental in my opinion.
This is also interesting, Ricardo, and you gave me so many more ideas for future podcasts. This is what's yeah. Thanks so much. But before we wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you one final question. You talked about it in this podcast a lot, but for leaders, people who are listening to us right now, can you give us some tips where to start to become a more compassionate leader?
Well, I think many of them have to look in the mirror and say, am I being compassionate with my own self first? Okay. Much of the criticism that goes across the table starts in our own chair, where we look at ourselves and say, I'm underperforming. I'm not doing enough. I'm not, worthy of this. And this is a narrative that doesn't work favorably in terms of what your objective is. So if you do want to install a mindset of compassionate leadership around you, start off with your own self and admit to your own self that you might not have done the best today, but what have you learned with this? How can you use this to inspire not only others but your own self to doing better tomorrow? And learning from this is already a big step. The next thing I would say you have to do is also be sure that you switch the conversation, in the sense that it's not so much about I or yourself. It is more about the others. And a thoughtful leader will understand that this I isn't a useful starting point for conversations. You're there to help others. Okay, and as such, if you're going to be concerned with your own ego-driven desires, then this is basically negating you the possibility of evolving to this. And so it's quite important that we look at the conversations we're having with others, even sometimes with our own selves, and saying, where is the I in this conversation? Where do I need to step in and look at myself and say, am I being compassionate enough with myself? Where do I need to step out and say, now is not the moment to be self-centered or actually having a conversation where I am occupying all the space? And this sometimes is a bit of a tricky ordeal. For me, at least, it's not a given that I have complete and absolute, at all moments, the full sense of what I should be saying or I should not be saying to my own self and to others, if I don't force myself at least to make this question on occasion. Another thing is more and more we need to build collaborative cultures in our companies. I was talking to a very interesting and important client that we work with here. It's one of the biggest banks, and they were telling me that we have people that have been working together in the same space for over 15 years that only now, through a leadership program that we're running, discover that colleague, that person, actually has something that is a little bit more interesting than just the colleague that he's been working with. Because they have to build things together. They are now challenged under this leadership program to come up with suggestions as a collective and not as a individual. Just the fact that they have this breakthrough, for me, shows that the leadership that they are under now is much more compassionate than the previous one. The previous one was completely task-oriented, completely result-oriented, and did not worry that people could be living 8 to 10 hours a day in the same space and do not have a relationship, a human relationship with the individuals that's the desk next to him. And so I think we still have a lot of space to evolve in many organizations, unfortunately.
Thanks so much, Ricardo. This was so interesting. I could go on and go on. I have so many questions, and I think I will keep them for probably our next podcast, if you will be available. And for these ones, thanks so much for sharing everything and for answering these questions and for being here with us today.
It's been a very big pleasure. Olga, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'm always happy to jump in.
Great. Thank you for that.
That's it for this episode. join us next time for more inspiring stories and tips on how to win at being a leader. Until then, goodbye.